Joining us now for some more insight on the latest news in Ukraine is Michael Weiss, news director for the New Lines magazine, who just recently returned from Ukraine. Michael, welcome to Morning Rush. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said in an interview with German media that the war in Ukraine could last for years. I mentioned that you were just there. What did you see on the ground that is kind of in line with that, and just how long this thing could possibly drag out?
Yeah, I mean, Ukrainian military officials, political officials are under no illusions that Vladimir Putin is in this for the long haul. They think so long as he draws breath and is in control of the Kremlin, they're going to be at a state of war with Russia in some capacity. The question is, are they getting enough kit? Are they getting the kind of Western security assistance they require in order to press a counteroffensive to push Russia out of the terrain it took starting February 24th. And, you know, you'll find some Ukrainians who are even more gung-ho than that and think now that they've got essentially the international community behind them, financially, diplomatically, and militarily, that they might even be able to retake some territory that Russia originally annexed or occupied in 2014, including the peninsula of Crimea and the so-called LDNR areas of Donbass in the east. So you get a mixture of opinions, but, you know, there's a lot of doom casting in the media right now that Ukraine is losing the war, that, you know, the wind is at Russia's sails. It's a very different picture on the ground in Kyiv, especially among the military brass. Yes, Russia is making incremental gains in Donbass around the Severodonetsk area, but Ukraine is remarkably still holding the line whilst it waits on the transfer of some of these sort of heavy weapon systems that your correspondent alluded to, including multiple launch rocket systems, HIMARS, which are the mobile version of these things. Basically, what Ukraine needs to do is be able to pull back to a safe position away from Russian artillery while striking those Russian artillery systems from that distance. And right now, they're not really able to do that. Once they are able to do that, they believe that the situation is going to change quite dramatically and quickly.
Got it. So from the very beginning, I mean, we talked about just how, you know, when you look at the numbers, how unmatched Ukraine is when it comes to the Russian forces. And from the very beginning, we talked about the resiliency of Ukraine's people and its, you know, armed forces. While you were there, what is that like? I mean, like you said, there's some doom casting going on, but I guess my question is, how are they receiving things, you know, as we're 100+ days into this?
I mean, if there's a sort of top-line demand that all Ukrainians have, it's faster and more. Faster in terms of Western supplies of ammunition and heavy weaponry, more in terms of the number of systems that are being provided. So, you know, I mentioned these HIMARS, these high-mobility multiple launch rocket systems, which are mounted on vehicles so that Ukrainians can shoot and scoot, meaning they can bombard a Russian position and then just get out of the way before the Russian counter battery can strike them back. The U.S. has confirmed they're sending 4 of these systems, which is really not enough for Ukraine to do what's required of it. And there's this sort of modus operandi in the West that we give them a little taste, we give them something, then we wait for proof of concept to see how well they adapt to these systems. And if they demonstrate battlefield effectiveness, then we provide more. The Ukrainians say, well, that's all well and good. Unfortunately, time really isn't on our side. Right now, they're suffering more casualties than they were at the start of the war. We've heard President Zelensky allude to this number, between 100 and 200 killed in action per day. I have it on fairly good authority from the Ukrainian military that figure is at the extreme end of the spectrum. It's not even an average. In other words, there are some days, really bad days, where the Ukrainians might lose between 100 and 200 soldiers, but that's not happening every single day. The idea is Ukraine is projecting this sort of dire urgency that they're facing Stalingrad on multiple fronts in order to speed this Western security assistance.
So before we let you go, since the beginning of this war, Congress has given $50 billion in assistance. At what point do you think that kind of support, that financial support, will start to falter? Because as we know, this could go on for several months, years even. Is that money always going to be there?
Well, that's a good question. I frankly don't know. A lot of it depends on the state of America's economy, the global economy, but there are certain indications that this is kind of going to be a permanent relationship with Ukraine. Ukraine is now set to achieve candidacy status at the European Union. That has more than just symbolic measures attached to it. If they are integrated into the European Union, there's a collective security clause to that membership status. We're not the only country, the United States, that's providing security assistance. The UK, Poland, the Baltic states. If there is an abiding belief that what is happening in Ukraine simply will not stop at Ukraine's borders, but could bleed out into the rest of Europe, that I think, just for cynical, self-interested motives, will keep the spigot turned on, as it were. And again, what we're seeing is actually the opposite of what you might think. Instead of a drawdown or a dwindling of assistance, we are now beginning to increase the level, the sophistication of weapons and armor that we are sending to Ukraine. They are going to be a NATO standardized army by the end of this war, whenever that happens. And that's something they've been asking for the last 8 years. And as your correspondent mentioned, one of the added benefits of that is there's almost a limitless supply of ammunition for NATO howitzers, NATO artillery systems, NATO rocket launches. What the Ukrainians have been fighting with up to this point, Soviet-era kit, it's simply, there's no ammunition for it anymore because nobody manufactures this stuff.
All right. Michael Weiss, news director at New Lines Magazine. Thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure, anytime.